Good morning. So glad you all can be here this morning for our faculty meeting. I wanted to take the time this morning to revisit the idea and concept of learning styles. And learning styles is certainly not new to any of us. It goes back to our Ed Psych Days 101. However, just a brief recap of what it is. Carl Jung came up with this idea. He was a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist back in the 60s, and he hypothesized that a student or child will have different learning styles, and he categorized them in three ways: kinesthetic, oral, and visual. And he hypothesized that there was a teaching method that would match that particular learning style. And if you identified that child's learning style and matched it with the teaching, the correct teaching, then the hypothesis was that the student would receive a higher level of knowledge and greater success. Well, that idea really started to take root in various ways. The initial way that it took off was the Myers-Briggs instrument. I don't know if you remember that. If any of you have taken a personality test or have taken a test on best placement in your career, Myers-Briggs might have been one of the assessment tools that they used at the time. That added a lot of credibility to what he was doing. But the second reason why I think it added some credibility was, frankly, the idea just kind of felt right. It felt intuitive. I think all of us can relate to the fact, or we've witnessed over and over again, class after class, year after year, students seem to learn differently. What works for one doesn't work for the other. And so it seemed very plausible that we would come to that kind of conclusion. The other appeal to it is that we all like the idea of our individuality. And being able to adjust instruction to individuality was kind of a new concept. And the other appeal to it is the whole idea that every child can learn. You just need to find that right method to get them to learn. So it's quite appealing to be able to adopt that as a credible thing. And it frankly took off. There is a curriculum that you can purchase on learning styles. You can spend lots of money doing professional development. You can spend maybe $5 a child to get an assessment tool for it so that it will assess a student's learning style. And we've seen the effects of it in our textbooks. Starting in college, students will be told, well, if you can just figure out what your learning style is, sign up for the teacher that best benefits that learning style and you'll get a better grade. Or they'll say, find out what your learning style is and adjust your study habits to it so you can have greater success. That sounds really great. It's still in our textbooks, and I don't think it's been removed from a lot of professional development situations. So if that's the case, what's the problem? Well, the problem is about 9 years ago, Cofield, who's a psychologist and educational psychologist and researcher, decided to review the literature and see whether, in fact, this can be proved. Is it correct? And he found some very disturbing evidence that there was a lack of proof that this, in fact, teaching straight to a child's learning style really did make an impact. Even though he brought up a lot of the concerns, really his concerns went largely ignored, and I believe a lot of it is because in the classroom it does have this sense of feeling right. So about 8 years ago, a highly acclaimed academic journal hired 4 cognitive psychologists from one from UC San Diego, one from UCLA, one from the University of Florida, and one from Washington U in St. Louis. They hired them basically to review the literature out there, and in the guise of, or under the auspices of public interest, they asked them to see if this in effect can be proved through scientific method. So they went ahead and started a literature review. Now, they do preface it by saying that it was not a complete scientific literature review, but it was enough so to come to their conclusions that they feel were validated. So basically, what they looked at was they collaborated as a team, and first decided that when they were going to review all the literature, what scientific method what were they going to have to look for, what method would have to be in place in order to prove that teaching methods that are taught to teaching styles do in fact create a better outcome. And so they decided that what they would do is look for any kind of research that had students identified for their learning styles, and then their students needed to be separated out, and while they were identified with a specific learning style, they would need to be randomly chosen to be taught a learning style that was opposite of what they were actually identified for, tested, and then the outcome needed to show a direct relevance to their either success or failure. So that was one type of study that they felt was going to be necessary in order to make this a valid hypothesis. The second thing that they felt needed to be in place was the validity of the tool itself. They felt like it needed to have a viable scientific method behind it in order to assure that the tool was really measuring what it said it was measuring. So when they went through this process, unfortunately, they found out that there really wasn't any studies out there that took that scientific method. Therefore, their conclusions are the hypothesis is invalid. Furthermore, they acknowledge that what we are seeing as educators is, yes, students are achieving at different levels because they all have different aptitudes, and we all have preferences for how we like to learn. They acknowledge that if you would ask somebody how they would like to learn, it might not necessarily be what they really need in terms of teaching methods to help them. For example, they noted that if you have a low achieving student, he might prefer to have a more solitary approach. He may want to be by himself, read alone, not necessarily be called out. And that is because he doesn't want to be put out there and be embarrassed. What he might benefit more from is a hands-on, direct approach, which he might not be exactly comfortable with. On the other hand, a high-achieving student may want to have more of a verbal lecture that's highly structured, and may actually benefit from the opposite of that, and may benefit from a more solitary approach where he could think and learn on his own and develop his own critical analysis, where it would become more of a long-term memory for him. At New Covenant Academy, while we do not particularly purchase curriculum specifically aimed at learning styles, nor do we identify on a formal level a learning style and teach to it, what we may do is we may indirectly talk to parents. Let's say there's a parent conference and you may say, you know, Johnny learns better when he's really hands-on and exploring things, and so when he's at home, maybe you might want to work on and whatever you want to recommend. What I'm thinking is maybe we, in alignment with current research, maybe we change our discourse and the way we express that to, instead of learning style, we talk about learning strategies. So I'm recommending that we continue to employ an array of methods that include exploration, kinesthetic learning, oral, instructional, verbal, all of the various methods that we all know to be true. Continue offering those strategies, but just not necessarily pinpoint it to specific student. It's important to note that the cognitive theorists of today are not completely refuting the learning style approach. What they're basically saying is that really there needs to be further research with the right methodology to back it up. This concludes our little brief professional development. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time.